My name is Abraham Flaxman, and I'm a professor of global health and health metric sciences at the University of Washington, and I work at the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. And on behalf of the Public Health for Peace and Justice in Palestine group, and also the Department of Global Health's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, I'd like to welcome you all to this third session in our lecture series on environmental health in Palestine. And today, we're really honored to welcome Dr. Rana Dajani, who's a professor of molecular biology at the Hashemite University of Jordan. Professor Dajani will share insights from her work on epigenetics, where she has explored the impact of trauma and war on people and genes. And I don't know if we'll hear about it, but she's also a social entrepreneur and the founder of a nonprofit called We Love Reading, which has established libraries in over 60 countries. And after Professor Jajani's presentation, we're going to have some time for question and answers. So as things go, please use the question and answer box in Zoom to submit questions at any time through this presentation. Uh, and also note that this Zoom session is being recorded, and we hope to make it available on YouTube in the future. With that, I'm so pleased to turn the floor over to Professor Jajani. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very excited to be with you today to share and to learn, and most importantly, for the questions and the critiques so we can all learn and grow together. So let me start by sharing my screen. Share, there we go. Yes. You can see my screen, I'm assuming. Okay, great. Um, so when I like to sometimes take control and introduce myself, in addition to the great introduction by you, Abraham. I like to say that I do multiple things. And when people talk about multiple things, they talk about multiple hats. But I don't wear a hat, I wear a scarf. So I talk about my multiple scarves. The first one, that I'm a mother. I have 4 children, and I always start any speech, wherever it is, that's the most important role I believe I or anyone can play as being a parent or caregiver, because, all our work is about bringing up the next generation. So why don't we talk about being parents as the most important job that we can do? The second one is I was a school teacher for actually 10 years before doing my PhD. And up till now, I look at myself as an educator. And I think that's the second most important role any person can play after being a parent, because the children, if they're not at home, they're at school. And the importance of the teacher informing and molding and inspiring future generations can never be underestimated. And I'm very proud of being a teacher. My third scarf is I'm a scientist. I work on epigenetics and genetics, which of vulnerable communities and displaced communities, as well as ethnic populations, minorities in different countries, such as the Circassians and the Chechens. But that won't be the topic of our talk. My talk will be about my work in epigenetics. And of course, science leads you to places you've never imagined. And that led me actually to spearhead an effort to develop the first stem cell law guidelines in Jordan that became a beacon for not just the Middle East, but the Islamic world. So, dabbled into politics and policy and learned a lot there. My fourth scarf is I'm a social entrepreneur, as Abraham said, and I'll share a little bit about that during my talk. And lastly, I usually don't share my fifth scarf, and I leave it up to people to guess what it is, and hopefully you'll guess by the end of my talk. Or I invite you to read my book, which is called Five Scarves: Doing the Impossible. I can send you a PDF. Don't buy the book; it's expensive, and people can read it and tell me what they think. I like to start as a person who studies biology and studies evolutionary biology, as a matter of fact, or of the work, when you want to try to understand your genes and how they function. I imagine there were two groups of people as humans were evolving. There was a group of people that sat around the fire and told stories. And there was another group of people that frowned upon those telling stories and accused them of wasting their time. But I'm sure you can guess with me which group actually survived. It was the storytellers, because through storytelling, that's how we learn. That's why all the books are stories, and that's how we teach our kids better, when we tell them stories. So, in the spirit of evolution, I'm going to be sharing a number of stories as I go through my talk. My mantra always is this famous saying by a Nobel Prize physicist. I'm not going to tell you his name. I have to give you homework. Remember, I'm an educator. What he said is seeing whatever a scientist is somebody who sees what everybody sees but thinks what no one has thought. I don't think that's just a hallmark of being a scientist. I think that's the hallmark of being human, that we're curious and we see things in different lights and in different ways and different perspectives. So whenever you see that magnifying glass, that would be me applying this mantra in my work. So starting with trauma. Being myself a daughter of refugees, my father is from Palestine, from Jerusalem. Trauma is something that has always been in my life, as well as many others. But always when science talks about it, and I talk science, usually it's Western science, it's always one event, and people talk about what happens after the trauma. And to me, it's like, wait a minute, this is a continuous trauma. This is not just a one event trauma. So how do we understand it when all the canon of science is all about post-trauma, post-trauma? How do we look at continuous trauma? And because, like I said, my father is from Jerusalem, my family, the Dajani family, actually has a whole neighborhood in the old city of Jerusalem. And we've been there since the 11th century. And this was the last picture that was taken actually in 1942 of the Dajani family. We were the caretakers of King David's tomb. We were the protectors of the Jews in Jerusalem throughout the centuries until 1948, when unfortunately, and this is our family tree that shows that we go way back 1,400 years. But again, in 1948, my dad was five, where we were living in West Jerusalem, and they were evicted violently by Zionist forces, and he went to Lebanon. And of course, this, what today we call the Nakba, is happening again with the genocide and the ethnic cleansing continuing in Gaza and in the West Bank. And we know it is a genocide now by virtue of the evidence, but also with the stamps of all the scholars and the international organizations. And here I want to just take a minute to acknowledge the academics who have been killed in Gaza in particular, with their families and extended families for that matter. We've created a project remembering Palestinian academics, and soon this will be launched and we'll share it with you, documenting their lives and honoring them and their memory. But it really strikes you, if when you want to destroy a society, you destroy three pillars of society. You destroy the health, which is happening, the health system. You destroy the truth and justice when you talk about freedom and journalists, and you destroy education, in particular academia. And that's why we need to keep talking about them and honoring them wherever we are. Now, the other thing that struck me when I look at, a scientist is seeing what everybody sees, but thinking what no one has thought. So the issue of trauma and a continuous trauma. But the other issue is, how do we deal with trauma? And the concept of sumud it's a word in Arabic, and there's no way to translate it exactly into English because there's not one word in English to explain it. It's resilience, it's steadfastness, it's many things. But to me, what piques my curiosity, again, the magnifying glass, is what does that mean? How do we understand it? What is the biology behind it? What are the genes that are involved? What are the hormones? What are the signaling pathways? And unfortunately, little is known about it. And so those two things really piqued my curiosity. And Sumud to me, and when you look at what's happening in Gaza and how the Palestinian people have been resisting and surviving, and I want to also say thriving, ultimately you have to notice that it has to do with their faith and their belief in that they have a cause that they struggle for, and it is that belief that is keeping them moving forward, and it stems from their religion, whether it's Christian or Muslim, but a religion that gives you purpose. Yet again, a third observation, nobody studies it in the context of public health, in the context of dealing with trauma. It's a taboo. And to me, it's like, wait a minute, if I'm a scientist and I'm going to be objective, this is a phenomena that I need to study, yet nobody studies it. So these 3 points kind of are shaping and forming my scientific endeavor. So with that kind of introduction, and hopefully to inspire you to follow your curiosity and what your observations as you pose your scientific questions trying to explain those phenomena. I'll dig a little bit deeper now into science. So we know that early life adversity is not just a global health crisis on its own, but it will impact the children as they grow up in multiple dimensions of their lives. And to me, the impact of early crisis, actually, I became more aware of it when the Syrian crisis happened. Again, the Palestinian one has been happening forever, and to us it became a commonplace. Unfortunately, it becomes your life, and sometimes you don't notice it. But with the Syrian crisis unfolding in 2011, and I'm living in Jordan, but another part of history is that my mom is Syrian. She's from Aleppo. So with the influx of 2 million Syrians into Jordan, that kind of like, oh my God, what is the impact of war and displacement? How is it and how impacting the Syrian refugees, and especially the children, because more than 50% of these refugees are actually children under the age of 18. So what is the impact on them? And at the same time, I was invited to actually assess and evaluate an intervention developed by Mercy Corps in New York City that claimed to reduce stress and anxiety of the adolescent kids and improve their resilience. So I was invited as an expert in biomarkers because I was at that moment and still now we're the experts in ethnic minorities, the Circassians and the Chechens in Jordan. So, in collaboration with Yale University, Catherine Panterbrick invited me. She was the anthropologist studying the mental health, behavior, and aspects of these children, and I was the part looking at biomarkers and the impact on the body. So, briefly, this program is an 8-week program that trains Syrian refugees and Jordanians who come from similar socioeconomic backgrounds on either, how to be a barber, fix computers, weaving, doing sports within a group of kids of their own age. Now, what we did is we did a randomized control trial, and we took 3 time points before the intervention, 2 months after the intervention was done, and then a year after to look for sustainability of the impact of the intervention. And we started with a slew of surveys looking at anxiety, distress, and all these standardized surveys. And we indeed showed that the comparing the Syrians to the Jordanians who acted as controls, that the program indeed reduced stress and anxiety in these kids. Now, first of all, the team that I had chosen to work because I was Syrian and Jordanian. I insisted nobody non-Jordan or Jordanian or Syrian would be involved in the actual data collection. And this was a huge advantage because the research assistants understood these kids, gained their trust, but most importantly, took feedback from them. And the feedback was these kids were being traumatized by the actual experiment, by the actual data collection, because it was traumatizing when you ask a kid, about your trauma, how you and how stressed you are. So this led us to actually develop a new tool to measure resilience. Something positive, so that the kids would go home after the hour of interrogation on a more positive tone. Now, the interesting thing about this resilience scale that we created was, first of all, that it showed that the program did not improve resilience. And the reason when we analyzed it is because the program was designed from a Western perspective of how you boost resilience, which revolves around an individual. When we know in our communities, the Arab communities, resilience is built because of community, family, relationships, and the program did not address that at all. So that was great feedback coming from the kids and the research assistants. And now the program is redesigned to add that kind of component. And Science ran a whole special issue on our discussing our work on resilience, but the importance of involving the local community in the design of the research study and evaluation of the results as well. And of course, within this popped out how the kids deal with resilience and dealing with trauma. And religion was one of those things that they go and pray on Fridays. And that's the component that nobody studies. And actually, many of my research collaborators were kind of scared of this religion thing, and the international NGOs. It rang bells for them when for us it was like, yeah, everybody goes and prays Friday in the mosque. That's normal. That's how you gain your resilience and your feeling of belonging. But to me, as a biologist, I was skeptical, with all due respect to everybody who works in surveys, design and survey collection. I was very skeptical of surveys. I still am. And that's why I like to look under your skin because your body doesn't lie. And that's why we went in and we wanted to look at the biological responses as a result of exposure to adverse experiences, so that we could understand how that impacts health outcomes. And I mean, there's a slew of biomarkers one could look at, but we chose to look at cortisol because it's a stress biomarker. And the good thing is that, yes, it's in blood, which is messy, and you don't want to get it out of take blood samples in the field in the middle of the summer from kids. So we actually consulted with the kids, and we explained the whole science. It was a great science awareness session, telling them what is cortisol, how it works, and explaining that it's in your blood. And of course, we all agreed that's not the way to go. We explained that it's in saliva, and we tried that for a while, but it was too messy. So forget about saliva. But then we explained, hey, science advances, and we know that your cortisol also deposits in your hair. So how about taking a sample of hair? Oh, everybody got excited about that one. And the parents chimed in and said we could get a barber and have a whole salon for the girls and do pedicures and manicures and take a sample of hair and do the research, which was fantastic. Our attrition rate was very low, and we indeed showed that cortisol was reduced in the randomized control trial compared to the children who were not involved in the intervention, which was great. But I wanted to go further, right? I wanted to look at your genes. And that's where we come into epigenetics. So we know that our phenotype in the world is a result of two components. One is what we inherit from our parents in terms of genetics and genes, and the other is the environment we interact with, what we eat, who we listen to, the relationships we have, and that forms who we are today. Because what happens is that your environment will turn on or off some of your genes. It doesn't change your DNA sequence, just turns on and off genes. So a disclaimer, maybe this lecture will change your turn on or off a gene. And if you're scared, I'm warning you, you can leave now if you want, just in case. So with that, so to dig deeper and explain a little bit what is epigenetics, our cells sense the environment around them. You can use the word listen if we want to, make it clearer or easier for us to comprehend what's happening, but they really don't listen. It's just they sense what's happening through a series of signaling pathways, molecules interacting with each other. And so here's your DNA, and your DNA folds around proteins. And the more your DNA is tightly folded, your gene is silenced. It doesn't work. It doesn't get expressed. And so there's no protein, there's no activity. But if you unfold your DNA, then it's open. The gene can be expressed, can be translated to a protein, and hence its function happens, or is made actionable. And so what happens is that through a series of experiences throughout a child's lifetime, different biological pathways are impacted, and your gene expression is impacted. And of course, those epigenetic modifications that happen as a result of early life adverse experiences, such as war and trauma and displacement, will impact your health outcomes in later years. And so, in a way, the epigenetic is like a dimmer. It can turn on or off. So it's not about turning everything off or turning everything on. It's just a change in what is turned on and off in different rates. And so we know that this has been studied in mice extensively, and the classical example of a pup that is being raised either by a mom mouse that is anxious, and therefore this mouse grows up to be anxious because of that treatment of his mother, while another pup that is being identical in terms of genetic background is being brought up by a high nurturing mother that takes care of it and licks it, will grow up to be a relaxed adult. And if we want to understand what's going on, it's the gene for the glucocorticoid receptor for cortisol. So what happens when you're stressed, cortisol is expressed, it goes around in your blood, ends up in your brain. And on your brain cells, you have the glucocorticoid receptor that binds to cortisol and internalizes it. And hence the cortisol goes down. Now, if the gene for the receptor is turned off, you won't have enough of those receptors, so you won't be able to internalize the cortisol from the blood, and so the cortisol will remain high in your bloodstream. Hence, you're always anxious. And it all relates to that gene that's being turned on and off. And of course, the question is, why do we have anxious behavior? Why has this remained from an evolutionary perspective? Probably it's because if your mom was exposed to a traumatizing experience as a child to that mother, you're going to definitely be close to such an environment. So it's good to have your receptor turned off. So you're always anxious and alert in your environment. And we know chemically you can actually reverse those epigenetic changes in mice. Don't do this in humans. Nobody's done it in humans. But you can chemically actually remove those methyl tags that are added onto your DNA, or the proteins, histones, where your DNA folds around, and take, therefore, a mouse that's not anxious, make it anxious, or vice versa. Now, therefore, your genome does not change. From a zygote, as a fetus, as a toddler, as a teenager, and then as an old person, your genome is the same. However, your epigenome changes with your different experiences in different stages of your life. And of course, the impact of these epigenetic modifications will impact early life, midlife, and late life, in addition to other factors in your life. And recently, there's been more and more interest in the role of epigenetics in psychological resilience. Like I said, looking at resilience, not just looking at stress and anxiety. The other thing that another tool that we use to measure the impact of the environment is our epigenetic clock. So this is a clock that actually looks at acceleration of aging, and I'll explain a little bit more about it. So there are certain environmental influences that will accelerate your epigenetic clock, and there are some that will de-accelerate them. And now this epigenetic clock is based on certain DNA methylation changes that change reliably with age. And so you can take that and correlate your biological age with your epigenetic age. And then you can see if any environmental exposure is accelerating or de-accelerating your epigenetic age, as you can see here. So what we wanted to do was to use this epigenetic clock and try to understand what are the intrinsic factors that impact it, what are the physical or social environmental factors, and then can we introduce an intervention that can change any negative impacts that result in acceleration of the epigenetic clock to de-accelerate it. And so we started with that same intervention, the Mercy Corps intervention, to study that, right? Would it change the epigenetic changes? So back to the same intervention where we had shown the change in behavior, the reduction in cortisol, we wanted now to look at the epigenetic accelerated aging. So again, we took the 3 time points in the randomized control trial, and we showed that the trauma of the Jordanians was much less than the trauma of the Syrians, both enrolled in the intervention, as we said. We showed that there was a correlation between the epigenetic aging and the biological aging. And then this is confidential, not published yet, but we were able to show that the group that did not take the intervention were not protected compared to the group that took the intervention. Their epigenetic clock did not accelerate at the same rate. However, unfortunately, a year out, the clock that had stopped accelerating went back to accelerating, which to me speaks to the context and the design of the intervention itself, because we saw that it reduced anxiety and stress, but may not boost resilience. And maybe it's that buffer that you need to keep that reduction in acceleration of the epigenetic clock. That needs further research, of course. And this is just acknowledging the different groups and funders that worked on that project. Now, to me, it was about can we find an intervention that actually can de-accelerate the epigenetic clock? And our hypothesis was the previous intervention was designed by the West from a Western context. How about an intervention that was designed by the local people for the local community? Would that have better impact and more sustainable impact because it's from the grassroots? So hence my intervention, Wheel of Reading, which I'll briefly introduce. So it's about what I notice is that children reading for pleasure is very important because it not just improves your vocabulary. You know about other people, other cultures, but it gives you empathy because you learn about other people, even if you disagree with them, but you understand their story and where they're coming from. Because this is reading of stories and reading of pleasure, not reading an education book or a religious book. And then, more importantly, you gain from it the confidence, the courage to be the hero you read about in case your community did not support you. And you learn critical skills. I mean, we could go on and on about the importance of reading for pleasure. But that piqued my curiosity. Again, the magnifying glass. Why don't children read for fun? Now, in Jordan, somebody could say, oh, maybe they don't know how to read. Now, the good thing in Jordan is that literacy rates are 99.999. So it can't be about not illiteracy. And in a way that allowed us to dig deeper and nuance the whole process. What I realize is that they don't read for fun because they don't love to read. And when we ask the question, so how do you get a child to fall in love with reading? We realize you need to have an adult, a role model, somebody who loves to read, who's reading aloud to you as a child, or even as early as when the mother's pregnant. Because as the neurons are growing and making connection, there becomes an association between reading for fun and security and safety because you're with your mom or dad or close caregiver. And this feeling stays with you when you're older. When you're happy, you want to read. When you're sad, you want to read. So with that kind of observation and analysis, I developed the We Love Reading program, where what happens is that we train somebody to read aloud to the children in the neighborhood in their local language, stories from their local culture, and then they line up, take the stories, and go home, and they become the drivers of reading in their household. So we kind of flip it rather than the parents begging the children; it was the children begging their parents to read aloud to them, or the children reading to their siblings. So giving them agency and fostering that intrinsic motivation within them. Now, this program is a training program. They are volunteers who take the training. It's online as well as face to face. When you finish the training, which is very simple, low tech, low internet to reach as many people as possible, you become a Wheel of Reading ambassador for life. Now, and you choose to read in your native language wherever you want, a church, a mosque, a community center, under a tree, on the stairs. And what we realized that the program didn't just work on literacy and falling in love with reading, which was the original intent, but it also resulted in reducing stress and anxiety for these kids because they were sitting with an adult looking eye to eye. This is not using a digital book, it's a real book, real experience. So it's that environment, again, that the Wheel of Reading program creates that results in that feeling of safety, relaxing, and improving the mental health of the child. But we also realized that the adults who were reading aloud to the children themselves, it improved their mental health as well because suddenly they had a purpose. They weren't, and in a very simple and easy fashion, especially for the majority of the people, women, men, older grandparents, youth, anybody and everybody. And also it boosted their leadership qualities because they realized, oh my God, if I can change these kids' lives, what else can I do? So this helped them, gain responsibility. We also created children's books to go with them to enrich the Arabic literature. And one of our books actually we wrote 2 years ago about the Nobel Prize chemist who won this year from He's Jordanian, originally from Palestine, Omar Yaghi. So he's a good friend of mine. And 2 years ago, we wrote a book about his discovery, which was so appropriate now when he won the prize, and to inspire a whole generation that you could be a scientist as well. I also wrote a book about the peppered moth, which talks about natural selection, and we connected it to biodiversity and climate change, which is also one of our very popular books for the children. So We Love Reading has scaled widely. We are today in 81 countries around the world. Everybody reads in their own language. They develop the program as they see fitting. These are some numbers that need updating. Like I said, we're 81 countries today. And the reason We Love Reading is innovative is because it has the secret sauce in the sense that the adults read to the children and assume and implement the program because they want to, not because they have to. They can quit whenever they want. And when you have the freedom to quit, you never quit. And this is a big challenge when international NGOs come in with programs. They give money, they try to, attract the people to do it, and people do it just for the money or that extrinsic motivation. And when the grant or the project ends, everybody goes back home. With We Love Reading, we've trained people like since 2014, and people are still reading aloud to their kids, to their neighborhood, because they care. This is about them, not because of someone else. So it's about that's the secret sauce, which is fostering that intrinsic motivation. And in the kids, they fall in love with reading because they love it, not because there's a grade or there's a gift. It's again driven by intrinsic motivation, which is very important, especially for the education system. Our second reason for being innovative is that our model is similar to DNA. It's very simple. You read aloud to kids in your native language, but you can implement it in any context, any language, and you own it, which is like, DNA is the same building blocks, but we all are very, very different how the DNA blocks are arranged. And lastly, we're not slaves to technology. We don't use it for the kids. The kids have a real book, a real person, but we use it for the adults. So the digital training online, we have a We Love Reading community where the ambassadors can contact each other, learn from each other, and support each other. And again, we've won multiple awards and we have different partners. We've been written about in different magazines, New York Times, Forbes, and others. Now, the important thing or the juicy thing for me is we wanted to study the impact of the program, how it works and why it works. So I invited a team of scientists from different backgrounds. Again, I'm a molecular biologist, so I invited anthropologists, psychologists, education specialists, and we conducted a number of randomized control trials on the impact of the program on the children and on the adult ambassadors, looking at different outcomes and in different time points. But this is the generic research design that we had adopted. And first, I'll share a little bit about the impact on the children. Here we showed that their reading attitudes all improved and was sustainable a year after. And we also showed, and all of this is published in academic journals and on our website. We also showed that executive functions were improved, working memory, emotional regulation, inhibitory control, and more so in those coming from lower socioeconomic status. So this is a way to jump poverty just by reading aloud to kids. We also came up with the idea, what if we had a series of books about particular themes? Can we change children's behavior on those themes? So we have a whole series on the environment, water, energy, littering, and we showed that indeed those behaviors changed. We did a whole study on empathy, and we showed that the empathy of the kids improved. We looked at emotional perception, and we showed that the children who were been exposed to trauma, their emotional perception was towards the negative, and after 3 months of reading aloud, they all went back to normal. And then we wanted to look at the adults. So and this is like an example of one of our adults, Asma. She's a Syrian refugee. I trained her in 2014. She's still reading to the kids in her neighborhood. And a documentary was made about her called The Neighborhood Storyteller. And just to say that it won multiple awards, the movie is about her, not about We Love Reading. We're only in the credits because to us it's about her story and how she has changed, not about us. We were just happened to, to be the trigger or we sparked it, ignited what was already inside every human being. We created a children's book to go with it, with the movie. And the movie now, it's part of a campaign called 1 Million Esmas, where you can watch the movie for free, take the training for free, and become a We Love Reading ambassador. Now, for the adults, especially women, the majority are women ambassadors. We did this randomized control trial looking at life satisfaction, empowerment, and psychological well-being. And the hypothesis was all of these would improve over a year. Now, life satisfaction indeed improved. However, empowerment didn't. And I was surprised because I knew these women. They were empowered. And I was this was work done with Catherine Panterbeck and the anthropologist, and she would tell me, but Rana, you approved the survey. No, I hate surveys. You approved the surveys, they were translated and everything. I said, yeah, I know, but something's wrong. And so, and fundamentally what was wrong is that yes, we translated, culturally adapted the survey that measured empowerment, but the whole way the survey was designed was based on an understanding of empowerment that was Western. So we need to understand how these women perceive empowerment in their own background. So we adopted a methodology called fuzzy cognitive mapping, where we put 12 women in a room and asked them, what does empowerment mean to you? And they came up with like 16 different definitions of empowerment. And then what are the factors that influence empowerment? Over 100. And we drew these fantastic maps that captured what does empowerment mean to them. And the plan is to design a survey based on their perception of empowerment that would capture in reality, in a randomized control trial, whether the empowerment has changed or not. Again, all this is published and one can look at them. So our theory of change at We Love Reading is through reading aloud, you change the child and the adult to become change makers, mediated by well-being, self-confidence, a sense of agency and ownership, and for the kids, well-being and lifelong learning and love of reading. And that's why our motto is changing mindsets through reading to nurture change makers. So we shifted from our objective being reading for fun to reading for fun becoming the medium, the tool to nurture change makers. And we are doing epigenetics. So the hypothesis is that We Love Reading is an intervention that will reverse the impact of adverse experiences of war and trauma in a sustainable fashion. We've collected the samples. We're currently working on doing the epigenetic analysis. So stay tuned, hopefully in the next year, for those results. Now, the last question, when we study epigenetics, we say what genes are turned on and off as a result of exposure to trauma. The second, can you reverse them through the intervention study? The third one, do you pass on those changes to your grandchildren? And we know that usually most epigenetic markers are actually erased at the zygote level, and every generation is fresh and doesn't have the baggage or accumulated epigenetic changes in the life span of the parent. However, some do escape. And we know in mice and nematodes, worms, that yes, you have epigenetic changes in one generation that can be detected in up to the fourth generation. So third generation is intergenerational, the fourth is transgenerational. Now, in humans, nobody's done those experiments because, first of all, it's not ethical to put a group, and expose them to trauma and then wait for 3 generations and the other group not to. But to me, as a scientist who understands epigenetics and somebody who comes from a region of conflict, I thought, wait a minute, I can answer that question. And because I remembered my mom, who's from Syria, there was a massacre in 1982 by the former father of the Assad regime, Hafez al-Assad. And in it, more than 20,000 people were killed, and many escaped and actually lived in my home in 1982. So I thought, if I can find those families where the mom was pregnant in 1982 and trace her children and her grandchildren, I could answer that question because I knew families who were not in the city at that time. And so we could find those families, we could answer that question while being ethical. And the people would trust me because I'm Syrian and these are my, relatives and people who know me. So we designed an intricate design, as you can see here, comparing 3 groups of people. The group of 1980 that was exposed to violence of trauma, the daughter and granddaughter who weren't. The 2011 group where the grandmother was not exposed, but the daughter was exposed in the 2011 uprising and 2 grandchildren. And then the control group from the same area had left Syria before 1980, where none of the 3 generations were exposed to trauma. And in the 3rd generation, we took 2 grandchildren because we wanted one to be born before 2011 and one after, so they would act as internal controls. So this was a very intricate design. It took us 10 years to find enough families to fit each cohort, which we finally did. And these are some examples of why, although the Assad regime was still in power, but they trusted us and gave us the information and gave us the samples. And this is just detailing when and where we took the samples and the different comparisons that we made. Of course, this was a joint effort from Catherine Panterbrick at Yale, Connie Mulligan from Florida University, and Alexandra Binder from Hawaii University. Now, what we showed, these are our results, was published in February, that there was first we had 21 sites of an epigenetic signature for direct exposure, meaning the mother who was pregnant. I mean, this is not new. The sites were new, but the discovery was not new. Now, the new thing was that there were 14 sites of epigenetic signature, meaning changed, in the grandchildren of the women who were pregnant in 1982. And these grandchildren were not exposed to trauma. So this was the first time to document in humans an epigenetic signature of trauma that could be transferred intergenerational to the 3rd generation. And the third result is that the prenatal exposure, the fetus that was exposed to trauma, had accelerated epigenetic aging. And this was a first as well. Nobody had shown that before. The direct exposure had no accelerated epigenetic aging, and the grandchildren had no accelerated epigenetic aging. It was only the prenatal exposure. And probably it's because those cells are actively dividing and hence very sensitive to the environment around them. But this, to me, speaks volumes for what's happening in Gaza when you have 50,000 women pregnant. What are these fetuses being exposed to, and what is the accelerated epigenetic aging happening to them? Again, like I said, this was published, and then we followed up with looking at telomeres and the shortening of telomeres, which is an indication of accelerated aging. And we indeed found that there was telomere shortening in the direct exposure to trauma as well. So these are that's a summary of the results. I'm not going to go through them again because we're running out of time. I want to end with trying to understand, so what do these results mean? So we did not correlate them with behavior. We didn't collect like what is the mental health status or what is the medical health status of the grandchildren. So that's something that should be done in later studies going forward. Now, when we looked at the genes, especially the 14 sites where we saw the epigenetic signatures, they were not present in any known biological pathway related to any disease. We looked at all the pathways. So we need to keep looking, because these pathways and these databases keep getting updated, but they weren't in any. Of course, we don't know their function. These are genes that are not, of not known function, so we need to, express them in cells and try to figure out what they do. But ultimately, what we hypothesized is that since they did not show up in any known biological pathway and they don't have a known function, that they work at a very higher level of gene regulation that have to do with behavior. But since we don't understand behavior, it's a black box, and we know it's multidimensional, nonlinear how humans behave. We looked at the animal kingdom and other not animals, other organisms, to try to see are there any correlations. And a recent paper had been published about octopus. Yeah, and octopus are very similar to humans. Not only that they're very smart like humans, but they're very social creatures. And they live in complex environments such as humans. And they have, similar to us, we have epigenetic modifications on our genes as a response to the environment. They also have huge regulation of their protein expression. And so kind of that made me think that then maybe we need to shift how we perceive trauma as rooted in evolutionary biology. Humans have been around for at least 200,000 years. 200,000 years, yeah. And we've been fighting. I mean, this is not the first time we're having wars and trauma. So if we were all accumulating epigenetic signatures of trauma that were negative and detrimental, how come we are surviving today? So to me, the concept of trauma that makes us victims and that we pass on victimhood and vulnerability to future generations is a colonial trope. First, they colonize us, oppress us, and now they want to come and save us. And so this propagates that victimhood mentality, which actually makes us even worse. It's like a feedback loop. And I wanted to propose that those 14 sites are evidence that no, what we pass on to our grandchildren is not victimhood and vulnerability, but agency through adaptation. And we don't, and I hate putting things in binary. So it's not about we're being victims and victimhood. And I'm not saying we're being heroes either. I'm saying that humans are a spectrum. We're very diverse, and that's why we survive. And that diversity is what gives us that adaptability and agency going forward. And if we shift and use this framework, how we measure, how we design interventions, how we create policies will all change. And it will give ownership back to the people themselves who are suffering or going through, let's say, the war and the displacement and the trauma. And when I explain this to my kids, which I always do, I explain all my science, they go, oh, now we get it. This is the immortal kiss of our grandparents. And so now what we're trying to do is doing 4 generations, because that was an intergenerational, just looking to the 3rd generation. Now we're working with Palestinian population in Palestine and in Jordan, those who left before 1948, those who left in 1948, those who left in 1967, to compare continuous trauma versus one-time trauma and to compare transgenerational up to the 4th generation. We actually went back to the families that we had collected the samples from and shared the data. And when we gave them this new framing, and it made them so happy and optimistic and hopeful. And one of the grandchildren, who now is 12, she was 2 when we took a sample from her. She wants to be a physician. It's just amazing. And they came up with these ideas of now we can use this evidence to hold accountable the perpetrators. And of course, we want to stop the violence to start with. I mean, we're showing the evidence of how the violence is impacting immediate generations and future generations. And to me, this is how you do better science for humanity. And the thing that I'm interested now in studying, going back to when I started, is sumud. What does this mean? What are the biological markers of sumud? What are the hormones? What are the immune markers? What are the genes? What are the epigenetic markers of sumud? This is a whole field that is very understudied. We don't have these markers. So I invite you, I mean, to join me and others to start these initiatives, these research projects to understand what this means. Because I think the world needs some positive and hope to understand how we handle things. And again, I emphasize religion as a hallmark and one of those paths. I think through evolution it evolved. We evolved and we survived because of we're social creatures, we're community, and so to understand how those relationships actually boost our sumud, our resilience. We have agency when we have a problem to solve. This gives us a positive going forward, and meaning making. Meaning making is what religion is, right? We call it religion, but I think through evolution we've evolved to do meaning making, which is faith. So, but ultimately, we need to stop the violence, and that takes a lawyer, an activist, and a storyteller to change the world. So, hopefully, I contributed as a storyteller to change the narrative of how we do this. But we always need to speak up. And when people, and I'm speaking to a wonderful group here who understand that the role of a scientist is not just to do science, because science is never neutral, but to speak up, as Einstein said, that it's not the evil in the world that will destroy the world. It's those who stand by and without saying anything. And that the struggle in Palestine is connected to the indigenous struggle all over the world. And I keep saying, I don't want to wait 100 years from now to stand on a stage as today Native Americans stand and get acknowledged for their land that was stolen. I want to change it now while we still have time, before time runs out. And how all these challenges, the indigenous community, LGBTQ, Black Lives Matter, racism, they're all connected, and we need everybody. And this is not a religious issue. We have wonderful people, Jews Voice for Peace and others, we're all standing together in the face of white imperialism and colonialism. Some books to keep you, and then maybe you have read them: Towers of Ivory and Steel, The Palestine Laboratory, and Perfect Victims, and there are many others. And then the least we can do is boycott BDS. And as academics, this is one way to hold universities accountable, who they partner with, professors and academics who they collaborate with, and where funding goes. I invite you to be part of this network. It's called Academic Action Network for Palestine. It's something I have co-founded with other Palestinian scholars all over the world so that we could, bring back, liberate Palestine, liberate our thinking, decolonization, and remove racism and oppression. So with that, remember, everybody's DNA is different from everyone else. Even if you're identical twins, epigenetics is going to make you slightly different. So you have something to give to the world. And if somebody says you're just a drop in the ocean, tell them, but what is the ocean but millions of drops? And write your stories. We need to hear your journeys, because you are our heroes, and the heroes of the future generations. Thank you very much. These are my heroes, by the way. I've changed them over the years. Thank you very much. And remember that it starts small. When a butterfly flutters its wings, according to the chaos theory, it moves the wind a centimeter, and it results in a hurricane beyond time and space. So be those butterflies of change. Thank you very much.
Really amazing how much breadth you have covered in a short amount of time. Thank you so much for
You're welcome.
all of this. We still have some time for questions. I see some have come in and I can ask them. We could also try the hand raising features if anyone wants to experiment with that and ask themselves. And I will ask one that I think is quite timely and connected while we wait to see others come in. It's really about Samud. And it begins by thanking you for this talk and by noting that Palestinian society is famous for Samud, and says during the current war and ongoing genocide, the Israeli occupation regime has been targeting and attempting to uproot precisely this resilience in the West Bank and much more in Gaza. And from your deep expertise and familiarity with Samud, and given the lack of geopolitical checks and balances on Israel, what kind of help can we offer the backbone of Palestinian society now to mitigate trauma and help renew its resilience?
Thank you for that question and describing the situation. Now, for immediate action, actually, there are many groups coming together to help with the trauma, especially now with um, we don't know what the situation is on the ground. I mean, we all know the ceasefire is a sham. To me, we to offer. There's a coalition of mental health organizations that are working within Gaza, whether online or on the ground. If people are interested, I can send you the link. And the idea is for this coalition is that we map so we don't have redundancy and people know what others are doing. And so capacities can join hands and collaborate with different expertise to help in as efficient as possible while giving sovereignty to the people in Gaza and West Bank for them to take control of their lives. For us, again, not to repeat where we want to come and save them, but for them to lead and tell us how they want our help. So I don't know, should I drop that in the chat or send it later and then you can add it if you want? Because I'd have to check, get the link
Oh,
and
if
send it.
you don't have it now, then please send it later and we will circulate it. Yeah.
Yes, I will. I mean, because I'll try to get it while we're speaking, but yes, that would be great. And for that's in that sense. But in Sumud, we want to understand what is Sumud from a research perspective, as I said, and I think that's very important. And again, this is an invitation for others to come and join us.
Before I read anyone else's questions, I just want to follow up on the untranslatable nature of Samud because I find so intriguing the challenge of moving these concepts between cultures. And you mentioned that like resilience is a imperfect way of capturing it, but what are we missing when we say that? What else should I know about it?
Ah, so again, it's back to that fuzzy cognitive mapping, right? Because resilience has a certain meaning in Western society. So the idea is, what does resilience mean in Palestinian society or Arab society, and that's when you get to the nuance of what is sumud. Because I'm sure if we do the resilience exercise, that's the plan, what we're planning to do, they're going to come up with different meanings. One of them will be resilience, whatever we want to translate that. When we tried to translate it, murune, which really doesn't capture it. So again, local contextual language is so important. And this actually kind of overthrows a lot of the traditional way of measuring. So, but I think we need to keep pushing the envelope, challenging the concepts and frameworks because many of them were designed in the past by, sorry, excuse me, but by white male old European men. And so we need to, look at different contexts, different diversity. And I want to add one thing about Sumud. It seems Sumud is not unique to the Palestinian people. I'm sure it's present in all people that have been oppressed. I think what's different, no, what we are seeing today that we didn't see is we did not have the power of communication and exposure during colonialism in the past. When Britain colonized India or European countries colonized different parts of Africa, the people were not there. They didn't. I mean, there was some writing, but we weren't watching it live to see how they dealt with it. Their sumud. We weren't around to read it, to know it, to document it properly. Because who documented what happened? It was again the British who documented the oppressed people. So it's kind of, and for today we have a colonizing entity live in the 21st century, colonizing, and we're actually documenting how the oppressed or the colonized are responding. So it's not unique to Palestine. I'm sure that was the same response that was happening in India, in different countries in Africa. But for the first time, we're actually capturing it live and documenting it and trying to understand it. Because I think it's a human quality. It's how we survive.
Well, that I think takes us to time. So everyone use your react emojis to thank our speaker again. And thanks to all of you so much for joining us today. And Professor Dajani, let me thank you one more time for this really excellent talk.